I am Uriah Heep, and this is Uriah Heep's Literary Cafe. And on tonight's episode of the Great American Novel Series, brought to you by Authors Matrix, we'll be listening to Chapter 4 of The Village Idiot by Dan Blanchfield. As you may remember, as Chapter 3 ended, Addison Way had just finished his first year of college, and very furtively was starting to study water, including in the university lab. His professors didn't know this, and when he brought up studying water, they were very angry. They thought he was nuts. Why would you study water? So as Chapter 4 opens up, a year has gone by. Addison spent the whole summer in his makeshift lab studying water. And now in Chapter 4, he moves on to a sophomore year of college. Let's see what happens. We'll see you on the other side.
Chapter 4. As the summer drew to a close, Addison closed his makeshift lab in the shed behind his parents' house for good. He had spent the summer devoting countless hours to his research, and now, with voluminous data in hand, was determined to bring his research to fruition this year at the university. He planned to utilize the lab as he was now a second-year student, and his access to the science department facilities would be expanded given his veteran status. He cautiously and deftly avoided undue inquiries from his parents during the summer months. While both parents occasionally questioned his use of time during his holiday from the university, neither parent posed any prying questions. Hence, Addison had little difficulty deflecting the nuisance questions that were asked. Addison arrived at the university for the first day of class and, by happenstance, ran into Jake Holzapfel outside the Commons. Addison did not welcome the greeting, and he wished to brush past the arrogant Mr. Holzapfel, but was unsuccessful and now felt cornered. "Addison!" Jake chortled as he grabbed Addison's right hand without permission and shook it vigorously despite Addison's veiled attempt to pull it back. "How was your summer, chum?" The term chum irked Addison as he and Jake were anything but chums. Jake had a way about him that tended to irritate him to no end, and today, Addison was the victim of his insincerity. Addison decided there was no escaping Jake now, as he was firmly planted between Addison and his ultimate destination. Addison relented. "I am well, Jake," he replied, "but I must be off to class." "Oh, Addison," Jake responded, always the one to mash his silly face into a book. "We've got plenty of time to hang, chum, before the first classes begin." Jake grabbed Addison by the arm, swung him around and pointed him toward the cafeteria. "I'll even buy you a cup of tea. It is on me, chum." Jake seemed genuinely friendly towards Addison, which softened him enough to relent to his offer, and the two made their way across campus to the dining hall. Upon arrival, Jake, true to his word, scooped up a couple of fresh tea bags and some hot water, and led the way to a couple of open chairs. "How was your holiday, Addison?" Jake inquired as he mashed his tea bag in his cup of hot water. Before Addison could respond, Jake continued, "I went across the pond to New York City to visit my great-uncle. It was a smashing trip. Best time of my life." Jake sat back in his chair, self-satisfied with himself as always. "How about you, Addison?" he continued. As Addison carefully pondered how he would answer Jake, his mind wandered back to his youth. He remembered how he and Jake had been chums in the earliest days of their schooling. Jake would come over to Addison's house every afternoon and grab him by the arm, much like he did as he directed him to the dining hall for some tea moments ago, and invited him to play in the woods. Jake was quite advanced in maneuvering around the wilds of Crumbly. The two loved the forest that encircled this quaint English country village, and would spend countless hours of their early youth exploring its environs. As reminiscences filled Addison's mind, he felt himself softening his attitude toward Jake. Perhaps he had been a bit too harsh towards his old friend. As one's life passes, we often forget how much someone's friendship once meant to us. This was the mistake Addison now felt he had made with Jake, and he reproached himself silently for it, while Jake waited for an answer as he sipped his hot tea. Jake's patience waned, and he did not wait any longer for Addison's reply. He failed to notice that Addison's attention was placed elsewhere and kept talking to an audience that was not wholly present. "I could see myself settling in the great city of New York one day, Addison," Jake continued. "London is great, but it is just a small town compared to New York City." Jake's enthusiasm increased as he spoke. "It is the modern age, chum," Jake said as he slurped yet another mouthful of tea. "It has every modern convenience, Addison. It was simply amazing." At this point, Jake could almost not contain his excitement as he related the superior benefits of living in New York City. "Imagine, Addison, in New York City, you don't have to go out in the harsh weather and scoop up fresh, raw sewer water from an open trench across the street like in Crumbly for your needs. Use your imagination, chum. All the sewer water you need in New York City is pumped into your flat." Jake sat back, self-satisfied once again with his brilliant observation of the city he had always dreamed of visiting. By this time, Addison had returned from his reverie and caught the remainder of Jake's last comment. He had spent the summer studying the nature of water and felt that he had come to something, but Jake's remarks made him feel queasy. He knew that no one in society questioned the nature of water. Everyone accepted that raw sewage water was perfectly healthy and met the needs of people worldwide. Who was he? Addison Way, a wayward second-year college student, to challenge a notion so deeply ingrained in the psyche of everyone. The question gnawed at him for the remainder of the day, even as he and Jake had parted ways after their morning tea. That evening, Addison returned home from his first day of classes disheartened. He had attempted to bring the data from his summer research into the chemistry lab to analyze his findings in preparation for further research. Still, he was repelled by Professor Underhill, who seemed to undermine his activities surreptitiously. The professor spied Addison quietly at work in the lab as dusk fell as he passed the lab on his way home. Curious that a student would still be in the lab this late on the first day of classes, Professor Underhill approached Addison, which took him by surprise as he thought he was likely the only one left in the building at that hour. "Addison," Professor Underhill startled his young protege as he entered the lab. "What business could you be so involved with this first day of classes? Everyone has left for the day." Startled, indeed. Addison jerked his head up and saw the professor glide down the aisle towards him. There was no time to gather his papers before him and shield them from his professor's prying eyes, and Addison knew not what to do. In an attempt to compose himself as his face was burning with a mingling of embarrassment and fear, he swiftly opened his chemistry book. He laid it over the pile of papers, hoping it would distract the professor momentarily. Professor Underhill stopped in front of the lab table now occupied by Addison and grinned as he spoke. "Addison, what is all this?" He paused. "Certainly, you could not have such voluminous work to review on the first day of the semester." The professor leaned forward, taking the liberty he felt was due him as a respected professor at a large university, and reached for the pile of papers now partially hidden beneath the chemistry book. Addison intercepted the professor's greedy hand and shook it vigorously. "Good evening, Professor," Addison said, hoping to distract him. Professor Underhill returned the greeting and remained motionless, hovering over Addison for a veritable eternity. At that moment, when Addison had nothing else to utter, a colleague of Professor Underhill appeared at the door and interrupted the two. The professor was to escort his colleague home this first day of the classes, and the impatience of said colleague was overwhelming. So Professor Underhill relented to his demands and bid Addison farewell. Addison felt relief, yet a sense of foreboding enveloped him as he spied his professor reading the half-crumpled yellow paper shoved under his chemistry book for just a moment as the professor's colleague harangued him at the door. Addison did not believe his professor heard the entreaties of his colleague, as his attention was diverted to that bit of his research that dangled in front of his eyes. As the professor exited the lab, Addison gathered the copious notes laid before him. He tried to discern which of them his professor saw with his prying eyes, anticipating having to construct a defense where the professor questioned him the following day. As he shuffled the yellowed papers from hand to hand, it became apparent to Addison that the professor had seen enough to damage his research. Disheartened, Addison spent a few lonely moments reorganizing his notes and secured them in his satchel in preparation for the journey home. The walk home was long and tedious for Addison, as he felt his spirits were crushed. Indeed, the professor would summon him to his office upon arriving at the university the following morning and subject him to a brutal inquisition regarding his research. As he passed the centre of Crumbly, he stopped for a moment's reflection at the base, the statue of Aldous Crumbly. He stared at the face of the founder of the village of Crumbly and recalled the stories he heard in his childhood about this famous inhabitant and how he succumbed to disease early in the prime of his life. Aldous Crumbly's writings reside in the historical section of the Crumbly Library that Addison read as a child while exploring this family's past. He remembered the horror he felt as he read Aldous Crumbly's final writings. That legend says he dictated to his only literate servant while on his deathbed, his body covered with sores, vomiting blood and bile, as he could no longer consume food. There is one vivid description in the writings of Aldous Crumbly, where he described his servants fetching raw sewage from across the street in preparation for his evening meals, that horrified Addison later in life when he recalled them. There was now a decided chill in the air, and Addison wasted no more time at Crumbly's statue and made his way back up the hill to his parents' home. He could not disguise his fear and disgust as he entered the house. Indeed, both parents would know something was amiss. However, the gravity of the situation remained a mystery to Edmund and Adele as their enigmatic son passed by them in the hallway. They exchanged glances as Addison swept past them, declaring an absence of hunger as he went to his room. The tossing and turning in his bed remained the activity for the evening as gentle sleep evaded his grasp. It was just before dawn that Addison finally fell asleep. Exhaustion had finally won him over, and his eyes closed, relieving him of the heaviness that had enveloped his mind. In those brief moments of sleep, Addison had a dream, the memory of which never left him until the last days of his life. Addison found himself high up in the forest bordering Crumbly's village in the dream. It was a place of great joy in his youth, and he saw himself frolicking among the massive trees and abundant wildlife. He wandered for miles before coming to a stream filled with the crystal-clear waters of an early spring. The air was fresh, and there was a warm breeze Addison felt as he bent over to touch the flowing waters rushing past him. He had never regarded such ease in the world as that moment. Daringly, he cupped his hands and plunged them into the water, then raised them to his mouth and drank it for the first time. There was no taste, no putrid odor to make him recoil. There was just fresh, clear water dripping down off his chin. He smiled and took some more. Again, no taste or foul smell was emanating from the water. As Addison attempted to gather a third bit of water from the stream, he noticed the water was turning brown in front of his eyes. He recognized the odor now and felt sick. In seconds, the entire stream resembled the sewer trench across from his parents' house. He panicked and tried to remove himself from the ever-rising waters before him. He failed. As the stream began to overflow its banks, it turned dark brown, and he could see large chunks of fecal matter bobbing up and down in the wretched waters. The waters rose faster than he could pull himself back from the brink. He wished to cry for help, but he was clearly alone. As he began to succumb to the torrent of water determined to envelop him whole, he saw his lost brothers and sisters floating by, waving at him and smiling that grim smile of certain death. He attempted to reach out to his siblings, but the waters were too strong, and one by one, he witnessed his family disappear beneath the raging waters for good, and he wept. His last attempt at securing a place on dry land behind him suddenly seemed within his grasp. He locked his hand around a branch of a tree on the banks of the river and began to pull himself out of the waters. It seemed to take every ounce of strength to move the minutest amount, but he fought valiantly. As he looked up, he saw hundreds of village folk surrounding him, all cheering for his escape, except one. Professor Underhill emerged from the crowd and approached Addison. He smiled gently and proceeded to stomp Addison's hand, causing him to release the branch that was his only hope of survival. The branch broke under the pressure of the professor's foot, and Addison plunged into the icy sewer waters, now only another piece of waste being washed downstream. He screamed again before joining his long-lost siblings in the horrific abyss. Addison awoke drenched in sweat. He wished to scream, but managed to restrain himself as he quickly realized he was awake. There was no torrent of raw sewage water raging beneath his feet. He smelled the sewer trench across the street from his parents' home, but the stench was muted at this time of the morning. He dried off his sweat with a towel and dressed himself. His sense of dread was palpable as he readied himself for school in the dim light of his room. Indeed, Professor Underhill would be waiting for him outside his classroom, prepared with his inquisition. There was no possible escape now, and Addison resigned himself to the inevitable that his university career would end this very day. Again, he surreptitiously managed to evade his parents' questions, in part by declining the breakfast prepared by his mother. He did not wish to insult her, but did not have the strength to withstand the inevitable, withering litany of questions that would inevitably be directed at him. He had skulked in last night and avoided his parents, so it was not without reason that they would be questioning him about last night, and he wished more than anything to prevent that uncomfortable confrontation. As the door slammed behind him, his parents looked at each other, each hoping for assurances. "I am so worried, Edmund," Adele whispered. "Our son seems so unlike himself." She could say no more and began to sob quietly. While one might expect sympathy from Edmund, Adele found none. He quietly placed his spoon on the table, relieving it of its duty, and momentarily stared into space. "Our son will come to ruin, Adele," Edmund finally said quietly. The quiet was in no way indicative of his state of mind. He was angry and afraid of how he might give form to it in front of his wife. "Addison will be our final loss." With this fatalistic statement, Edmund summed up their hopes and dreams for their only child who had achieved adulthood. All the losses the couple had experienced over the past decades came to the fore, and painful memories flooded each of them. Edmund and Adele had considered themselves good parents. They had indulged their children and worshipped them always. This house had once been a respite from the cruel outside world, as Edmund and Adele perceived it, and was full of the joy that only children can bring to a couple. They were resolute in their determination to raise healthy, curious, and happy children when they married. So few of their childhood friends had managed to survive to adulthood and marry that the two of them felt it was a magnificent gift from God that they had not only lived, but found each other and had a life together that so many others were so cruelly denied.
So, we have Addison Way in college with Professor Underhill. What did he see when he grabbed at Addison's paperwork on the lab table? What will happen tomorrow when Addison goes to school? Or now, for that matter, well, the next chapter. And will he be confronted by Professor Underhill? Well, we'll find this out and more, hopefully, in Chapter 5. So we thank you for tuning in, and all of you have a good evening. Drink some fresh, clean water tonight, because it's good for you. I am Uriah Heep, and this is Uriah Heep's Literary Cafe, and you've been watching this edition of the Great American Novel series, brought to you by the Author's Matrix. we'll see you next time. So goodbye, good luck, and good evening. Right?